Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Barrett from the Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
And we just talked to you last night after Purdue's 82-51 season opening victory over Evansville. A lot more basketball talk on this episode. We're going to kind of take a 10,000-foot view and put some things in context in Purdue basketball's pursuit of a national championship. It's obviously the preseason number one, the betting favorite to win the national championship before the start of the season. So looking at some angles of how possible that is or how likely that is or what could get in the way, that sort of thing. We did want to talk about football first. Sam, you were at football interviews on Wednesday morning. I did not make the trip up to the complex, but obviously Purdue about to play the number one team in the country in Ohio State. I was looking at last night's national. Talk about this real quick because last year the schedule was like such a topic of conversation. And we thought this year was going to still be tough, but maybe not quite as tough. And then IU did what it has done this season and changed that a little bit. So, but of the 25 teams in the first college football playoff rankings, Purdue has lost to teams ranked number 10, 9, and 21. That's Notre Dame, USC, and Michigan. It still has to play, and it only has 3 games left. Washington, IU, and number 1 OSU this week. Number 2 IU. Bucket game, and in between a trip to number 23, Washington. And I feel like I'm getting to the end of this year and thinking the schedule isn't what makes Purdue look bad. Isn't what makes its record look bad. The schedule isn't why Purdue isn't going to make a bowl. But the schedule is why Purdue probably only had a chance to win. It was like maybe maxed out at 4 wins this season.
Yeah, and that's why we talked about numerous times that stretch with Northwestern, with Rutgers, with Minnesota, not getting one of those. Even if you win one of those, the season feels a lot different because Purdue would have won a Big Ten game for the first time in 2 years. But yeah, we knew coming out of that and looking into November with Michigan, Ohio State, Washington, and Indiana in consecutive games, there was an idle week in between Washington and Indiana. There was not going to be a win in that stretch, most likely. And thus Purdue did everything right. And another team had some things go horribly wrong. So just not capitalizing there. And then now you're playing maybe the most talented team in the country this week, which just saw you play maybe your best game of the year at Michigan a week before.
Yeah, I think you could make an argument that IU should be number 1 in the playoff rankings just based on resume. Like going on the road and beating Oregon and just destroying Illinois at home the way they did might be the 2 best wins of 2. They might be better 2 wins than Ohio State has on its schedule. However, I think Ohio State is the best team in the country and the most talented team and the one that's playing the best right now. I would just say from a vibes standpoint, comparing, I just did a podcast with some of my old OSU colleagues and trying to describe the vibe. And I think this put it in a little bit of perspective for me too, because I felt like last season's team was just buried under that schedule. That when things were as bad as they were early, and then you saw what was still coming, then it felt like that team was just flattened by the specter of that schedule. And this team doesn't feel like that. We may have a different perspective on it in a month after they've played these last 3 games. But right now it feels like, no, they're not good enough to beat these teams, but it doesn't feel like something that is weighing them down.
Yeah. I think we've both said this. I don't know if we said it actually publicly, but this team is not as talented, at least top heavy as it was last year with players. And I think has been a much better team competitive wise, just the way that the product looks on the field. So there have been strides in that department, but ultimately when you look at a team that's likely going to be 2-10, it's hard to point to that and say that there was progress made in the first year under Barry Odom and the staff.
So give me the one thing maybe that you're looking for on Saturday. This is a game, Purdue is a 29.5 point underdog. OSU has just been blitzkrieging the whole schedule that they've played basically so far. What's like forefront in your mind that if win or lose, you need to see this from Purdue on Saturday?
Yeah. So Ohio State's defense is just nasty. Two teams have scored in double figures. Nobody scored more than 16 points, and that was a game that Ohio State still won by 3 scores. And Purdue's offense, quite honestly, hasn't been what it had been earlier this year against some of the more marquee opponents here against Northwestern, Rutgers, even Minnesota, and then obviously at Michigan, some of those games where you thought Purdue really could do a lot of things, putting points on the board. Offense is going to be a struggle. I think the thing to watch is we feel like these corners are playing a little bit better, but was that a product of playing lesser competition compared to Ohio State or Michigan, teams like that? The two receivers, Cardinal Dayton and Jeremiah Smith, have torched everyone this year. I think outside of KJ Duff, who has a boost of a 240-point game or 240-yard game against Purdue, they are two of the top 4 receivers in pretty much every statistical metric in the Big Ten. So can you do anything to limit those guys? You're not going to stop them for sure, but that would be a sign. You kind of said this earlier this week to Hidori Hines. These guys want to play in the NFL. Well, this is what it looks like when you're trying to match up with an NFL receiver. So how can Purdue hold in the secondary against some of these marquee, guys that are going to be at the top of the NFL draft when they come out?
Yeah, I mean, they've put up those numbers without having had played Purdue yet, which is not something that Hank Beatty from Illinois and KJ Duff from Rutgers, for instance, could say, or Ian Strong from Rutgers, who put up some numbers that day. Yeah, like these guys have already played. They've already had their shot at Purdue. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more along the lines of defense too. There definitely are some questions offensively. Ohio State is just so talented there, and Purdue is, they're without Devin Mockbee now. I'm really looking more for exactly what you're saying, and they're not going to shut this team down. There was a conversation I was having prior to the season about Ohio State and Max Clare now playing for them, and somebody was like, well, the fear is like you shut down their receivers, and then Max Clare burns you. And I'm like, don't worry about that. Like that's not going to happen. Like that was before I'd really even seen this defense play against other power conference receiving cores. And my thing is, it's yes, this defense has had a couple of good performances, but they've had so many performances this year where quarterbacks and receiving cores have just chunked out huge. I mean, go back and look at what Notre Dame did in terms of yards per reception. Go look at what Jay Mayava did in terms of yards per attempt. Go back and look, obviously, what Illinois and Rutgers did. Like, that's where I look at it and say, if you're giving – it's one thing if you make Ohio State drive, and they will. Like, if you make them drive, they probably will. They're probably going to score X number of touchdowns regardless of how you make them score them. You can't just give them the 50, 60, 70-yard touchdowns. You have no chance, and that's how the avalanche does start to pile. I did think it was funny this week. Mike Scherer was talking. I asked him about Julian Sayin, and he was talking about the Ohio State quarterback, and he was talking about the progress he's seen him made this year. And the other thing he said was that he's only taken 3 sacks this year, and 2 of them were where he just ran out of bounds, like 1 yard short of the sticks, which technically goes down as a sack. And then at the same time, I listened to some of Ryan Day's press conference this week, the Ohio State coach, and the beat there was asking him, because when you're blowing people out, I can tell you as somebody who's in that room, you're still nitpicking because it's all against the national championship standard. It's the way we talk about Purdue basketball and the way that we will talk about it here later in this podcast. I don't care if you just beat Penn State 38-14. What didn't you do well enough that could cost you in the playoff? Like that's how the fan base looks at it. That's how the team looks at it. And it's certainly how the media then looks at it. But he was getting questions about like the pressure rate they were allowing. So on the one hand, Purdue is like, nobody can sack this guy. And the Ohio State beat is like, are you sure that he's getting protected enough? It was just funny to me to hear that. But I think he'll definitely be protected enough to that this secondary is going to have to step up. Like last week, what they did against Michigan, this is a whole nother world. And they are very much in danger of replicating one of those earlier, like just nuclear performances if they don't bring their best game.
Yeah, and I asked CJ Nunnally, the defensive end, who's done very well in transitioning from the back to the Big Ten this morning. I said, you played a freshman quarterback last week, and I think you did a good job confusing a really talented guy who's had a lot of success. And I said, now you're facing another freshman quarterback, albeit a different kind of quarterback. Do you think there's some things you can do to give him looks he hasn't seen yet? And he said, oh, absolutely. He did say we got to get to him. We got to put pressure on him. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's some things that are mixed up. The difference is Michigan's strength and skill was running the ball and being physical on the line, where not that Ohio State can't do that, but it's got all-world guys on the outside that, even if you can put pressure on the quarterback, they can still get open and you can throw a ball that they can go make a play on.
Yeah, Ohio State's rushing attack is not as prolific as the passing attack, but it's not bad. Like, they're going to be able to run the ball too. They've run the ball fine this season. It's not their primary skill, but it is something they'll be able to do. So what is your prediction for Saturday's game, score-wise?
I think Ohio State covers. And against an opponent like Purdue, if you have any sort of thing where a team hangs around for a half, then Ohio State maybe isn't the number one team when the next college football rankings come out. I think it's going to be like 42-7, 49-7, solidified. But I think this could get ugly. This could be the one where something we haven't seen since Purdue played Notre Dame, where a team just was unstoppable for an entire game.
Yeah. By the way, we do not compare notes before we do these predictions. We've been getting spookily close to each other, and we're exactly on the same page this week. I was going to say something like 35-7, something like that, because I thought Purdue would probably run the ball maybe okay and shorten the game up a little bit. Josh Henson would come up with some ways to do that. But the fact that Purdue just went up to Michigan and you could take any one of like 3 plays and change it, and that outcome might flip. I think Ohio State is going to take notice of that and respect it, because they have been able to beat Michigan now for a hot minute. In case you haven't noticed, it's a bit of a topic of conversation over there. So I think they're probably going to respect Ohio State or Purdue to some extent for that, and they're not going to come sleepwalking into this one. I'm thinking like I wrote down 42-7. So we're on the same page there. This is an incredibly tough defense. It is an incredibly explosive offense. And Purdue certainly is in a position, just based on results, where it has to prove that it can stay in a reasonable distance with that team. This is a different level than Michigan. Let's talk basketball. We were at the season opener last night, 82-51. You can look in our feed and go find the live episode that we did from Mackey Arena, about 20 minutes of goodness there. And been saving this topic for a time where we could sort of spread out a little bit and deal with it. And Purdue doesn't play again until Friday. I think this is a good time to do it. We've actually seen them play one real game, although without Trey Kaufman-Renn, so that colors things a little bit. But wanted to kind of talk through the national championship vibes and national championship expectations and some of the other lofty expectations around this team. But I think I've asked you a version of this question before, Sam, but you've been here through this whole run, through the whole Zach Edey run, and I'm just now coming back in starting last year. The transition from the number one seed losing the first round team to the next year, and that was still a team that had the championship foundation but had to evolve. Do you see any parallels between the transition that team had to make and the transition that this one now has to make, from having some of the essential ingredients that championship teams have, but having to strive for things that they haven't proven yet that this collective body can do?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, and it got to the point where those of us who are at every media availability at every game got tired of hearing other people who would just parachute in and ask their questions. The narrative was always around losing to that 16 seed, and it became a point to like the middle of the year, and Purdue's dominating some of the best teams in college basketball, and that question would come up, and to the point where some of these guys were like rolling their eyes. And I think in a way, it was like the only way to stop that narrative is to go out and win a national championship or go to the Final Four, and it was a big motivation. Now I think that in some way, not beating UConn in that championship game 2 years ago has been the driving force for especially these 3 seniors who have been starters for the last 3 years, and in the case of Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer for now their 4th year, they it kind of was coming into existence, and a lot of people were saying in 2 years, nobody maybe thought Purdue was going to be a national title contender a year ago, but thought Purdue would be pretty good, and that by season's end ended up being the case. But I think people said in 2 years this team is going to compete again for a national title. The Final Four is in Indianapolis, so how fitting would that be if Purdue finally breaks through? And subconsciously, I'm sure the players were aware of that narrative. They wouldn't probably talk about it openly, but I think that is a driving force, and there is a lot of, just the way that last year ended with Houston and seeing that Houston was a play away from winning a national title. I think Purdue exited last year thinking we're not that far away. And now because of the group coming back and them being seniors, Matt Painter doing something that you don't see in college basketball anymore, which is keeping your core group together for an entirety of their careers. There is that driving force and some parallels because a whole group of guys who were a part of it the year before are back with a motivation of coming up just short the year before.
To me, the parallel is sort of it's not really like getting a monkey off your back the same way it was 2 years ago. Like that team knew that it was not so bad that it would like always lose to a 16 seed, right? Like it was just the wrong night. Things went terribly wrong. And there were obviously shortcomings, vulnerabilities that they had that laid the foundation for that. But they knew they were better than that. They knew they were better, that the program was better than all of the early exits and upsets that had befallen them. But it didn't matter what they knew. They had to go prove it. I think it's a similar thing with this, where like they know there's some scenario where they can beat the UConns and the Houstons of the world in those tournament environments. I believe that they think that they can do that. I believe they think they're on that tier. I think they also know what they believe doesn't matter. You still got to go prove it. And I think that's sort of the driving thing right now. And that's it. I've been trying to kind of ascertain the psyche of this team, which is something I think people in our job just naturally do. You're always looking for like storyline narrative things. And like, what is it that makes this team mad? Like, I think 2 years ago, they were mad about that upset and the stigma and wanting to dispel it. Last year, mad is a relative term, I suppose. But last year, it was like everybody saying like, well, you lost your cheat code. Now what are you going to do? Like, you don't have force of nature under the basket that nobody can guard, and nobody knows how to even prepare for it. So now how are you going to do? Well, how they did was they fell short in the Big Ten, but they were very good, and they were right there to beat the team that ended up being the national runner-up in the Sweet 16. So what is it that like drives this team? And I think it's that motivation potentially is a very mature one, which is, no, we're here. Like, we've done it. Like, we've done all the things. We've developed the players. We've added the players that accentuate it. We've got the coaching staff in place. We put the Final Four, we like shook that monkey off their back, which I think has been a problem for past Purdue teams. Like, you would feel everything kind of tighten up like throughout the whole fan base and the community a little bit, because they always just expected something to go wrong. And when that finally didn't happen, I think that gave the teams that are going to come after 2024 some breathing room. So they've done all that. Now it's just a matter of, okay, but you still got to go do it on the court. I think that is the driving force right now.
Yeah, it was a kind of a surreal moment in Detroit 2 years ago when Purdue did break through. It was a heavy Purdue fan base. I bet 80 to 90% of that place was black and gold, and you had grown men crying. It was almost like maybe in 2016 when the Cubs won the World Series. People were like, I'm never going to see my team do this. And you had Robbie Hummel on the call on the radio, and he's in tears because he knew how much this meant to people, and he was, more involved in it than most. Now it's kind of like there's that next step. You still haven't won a national championship, and in this state, you hear about banners all the time, and Indiana has 5 and Purdue has 0, and I'm guessing that's going to be the case until Purdue would win 5 and possibly catch up, or however many it takes to get to that point. But anyway,
I want you on the record. How many years until Purdue wins its 5th national championship?
We won't be alive if that happens. So, but yeah,
I don't know if anybody's going to win 5 more in either of our lifetimes. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the driving force now is because a lot of teams run away from this and say one game at a time and things like that. And this group has been very forthcoming in saying our goal is to win a national championship. I think they understand the process is one game at a time, but they are realistic that Purdue has a team that's capable of doing that. And really, that's the only satisfactory end to this season. I think, if Purdue got to the national championship game and lost again, it would be a successful season in the eyes of most of the country. Probably not for the guys that were on this team, especially for the guys who already went through this 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that would be, from again coming in after the Final Four. I feel like there's always been a healthy perspective on that UConn game. I think everybody looks at 2024 and says that was a national championship caliber team, no doubt about it. And in many other years, they would have had an opponent in that game that they would have beaten that could have matched up. But they just happened to that year run into the wrong one, and nobody was really beating that team at that point. And UConn was just kind of, what they were in that 2-year span was something special. About the only thing that superseded Purdue special. So would they have the same perspective if they came up one win short, or if they got to the Final Four, but it was the wrong draw for the semifinal or whatever? I don't know. But I do think this fan base handled that well. The community, the program handled that well. And it's another reason why this is sort of, I just feel kind of a mature vibe around everything as it relates to that. Now it's a matter of going out and doing it with basketball. So the first question I was going to pose to us was just kind of run down, each of us identify the top 3 threats to Purdue's national championship chances. That's not us trying to take like a negative stance. It's us trying to kind of accentuate Purdue's strengths by kind of putting out there, these are the roadblocks that they're going to have to overcome to get there. So, Sam, what was at the top of your list of threats that Purdue has to overcome?
Well, this is unfair because I have the luxury of having seen a regular season game now, but my number one thing was rebounding. Evansville had 20 offensive rebounds against Purdue Tuesday night. And yes, Trey Coppin-Wren was out. It probably doesn't happen to that degree if he plays, but Purdue just has to be better on the boards in general. I think Purdue's a team that, especially with Oscar Clough added, with Daniel Jacobson, with Trey Coppin-Wren when he is able to come back, should be able to win the boards a lot of nights. And if it does that, I think Purdue is in pretty good shape. But but part of its identity is getting defensive rebounds, getting out and running, and getting just quick kind of cheap points because of the makeup of your team and what you have at point guard. And if you can't get the boards and they're just getting not even offensive putbacks, because Evansville didn't really have a whole lot of putbacks. It was just offensive rebounds to delay Purdue getting out and running. If Purdue can eliminate that and get out and run, that's, an area where you can get 7 to 10 points pretty quickly. That could be the makeup of winning and losing in a marquee game in March.
Yeah, my number one thing, this is sort of linked up here, is that despite all of its other championship elements, that Purdue just doesn't get there in defense and rebounding. And those are very linked in all basketball, but I think they're especially very linked for this team. And you saw that in the way that they went out and sought certain players to accentuate this. I wanted to give some numbers here. That I wrote a piece, like my season preview piece, that was kind of looking back on 15 years of national championship data and where Purdue lined up with that last year and where those numbers showed it still has a lot of ground to gain. I was looking at so this is mostly KenPom data. Purdue last year had an offensive efficiency of 124.6. That was 7th in the country, and that is in line with almost everybody. Like hardly anybody has ever been outside the top 10 in the last 15 years and won a national championship. The only 2 exceptions were UConn teams that won the national championship in 2011 and 2020 and 2014. And those teams are outliers in a lot of these numbers for whatever reason. And people might remember one of those teams was a 7 seed. I think the other one might have been like a 5 seed. They kind of came from the edges of contention and won a national championship. Everybody else, you've got to have one of the 5, 6 best offenses in the country. Purdue is obviously right there. Defensive efficiency, they score last year was 99.2, which was 53rd nationally. And including those UConn teams, there is not a single team that had a defense that, I won't say bad, but like even adequate and won a national championship. There's been 2 national champions in the last 15 years outside of the top 15 in Ken Pom defensive efficiency, and that was Kansas and Baylor in the 2 years right after the pandemic. So like they have to get considerably better defensively to be in line with even the teams that were the least productive defensive teams as far as winning a national championship. And rebounding obviously plays into that. I'll come back. There's another number that really correlates. It's going to be part of an answer to another question later. But to me, that was, it put it in great contrast for me, like of exactly how good they have to be. There's also hardly been, especially in the last 10 years, teams that had a defensive rebounding percentage under 70%, and Purdue was right at 70% last year. So they weren't like off the pace as long as everything else was all right. But by adding Oscar Clough in, you assume that you have taken that up a notch. Both of those things, I mean, that's going to help you defensively, and it's going to raise your rebounding to another level.
Yeah, agree on that. What did you say for a second thing that may hold Purdue back in terms of a national title? Because I want to make sure we don't overlap on something.
Yeah. So I'm just going over my list to make sure, because I'm crossing off. We pretty much synced up on that one. So my other one was the border states. It was who could cost Purdue the number 1 seed in the Midwest. And there's, I think, 3 potential candidates. Now, for a while, it looked like Houston could be that candidate. I don't know if people followed this whole storyline, but for a while, Houston was not going to be allowed to host, to be the number 1 seed in the South region, because it was the host for the South region. And so it would have had to go to the Midwest if it was a number 1 seed, which people think they will be. They would project to be right now. But then they changed some things. Now Rice is hosting that. So Houston could be the number 1 seed in Houston in the South. So that took out one potential threat. But I think Purdue right now is going to win the Big Ten championship. I just feel like the schedule is just so favorable for them. All other things being equal, I think they're the favorite pretty easily, in my view, to be the Big Ten champion. However, there are some teams out there, Michigan, Illinois, Michigan State, so border states to Indiana, that I feel like have the potential to rise up and steal that away from Purdue. And I think we've mentioned on the pod before, but the path that Purdue could follow to go to the final, to go to the NCAA championship game, is a drive to St. Louis, a drive to Chicago, and a drive to Indianapolis. You need to walk to Indianapolis, ride your bikes, whatever. Ride Tom Dienhart's bikes down to Indianapolis. And that doesn't guarantee anybody anything. And also, I think this is a team that's talented enough that if you sent it through other regions, it could still make a Final Four and even win a national championship potentially. But it obviously is a more favorable route to be that close to home, both from fan support, travel time, comfort, all those things. And it's not that one of these other teams would completely derail that, but those are the threats to maybe jump up there and steal that number 1 seed, changes the matchups that you have later on, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I thought 2 years ago that was a major advantage for Purdue, was going through Indianapolis and Detroit, a 4-hour drive, and Purdue's fans being able to be along for the ride and fill these arenas with, a pro Purdue crowd. In the NCAA tournament, a lot of times teams are expecting, partially empty arenas, maybe in those early rounds, even definitely pretty neutral. You have 8 teams in one site. So you're getting kind of a mixed bag of fans. You get fans that are just there to watch, who really don't have an interest in anything. But 2 years ago, it was pretty pro Purdue every stop along the way, including the Final Four, because as we mentioned earlier, it just seemed like that was something people were so hungry for. They weren't going to miss an opportunity to go see that, because you don't know if you will ever again. If Purdue's able to get that, and I know we're looking way ahead, but that's what we do.
This is the look ahead pod. It's like the one time I think
Right.
we should do a big look ahead thing and a what if, and then we'll just actually talk about the basketball that's actually happening the rest of the season.
when you look at Purdue's non-con schedule, and like you, I believe Purdue will win the Big Ten. If Purdue does what it's supposed to do, I expect there to be some games along the way that Purdue doesn't win. The resume will be a number one seed. And when you look at the other teams who, as of right now, look like they'll be number one seeds, that does look like the path that Purdue probably has in the NCAA tournament. Now, when it gets to that point, it all comes down to matchups too. And that's the big variable along the way.
Yeah, the flip side of what I put out there is that Illinois and Michigan State all are really, really good this year. But because Purdue gets to play all three of them at home, if it wins all three of those games, it just further enhances the resume, because those will still be counted as like really strong wins, even if they are on the home court. By the way, that path that I'm talking about, what's ironic about it is I think that regional could be interesting, because this year the Big Ten tournament is also in Chicago. They're going to be playing at the United Center for the Big Ten tournament, and then potentially 2 weekends later back at the United Center for the NCAA regional. Like that, just being like familiar with the environment can be helpful for teams for obvious reasons. What else is on your list?
I put, and this is mostly based on what we saw against Kentucky. Purdue doesn't have that elite athlete that can just make athletic plays that you can't scout, because they just do things that you don't see. Going up over the top of a guy and dunking a ball back in that comes off the rim, things like that. Getting freak rebounds just because you have more, ability than maybe somebody else can jump higher, whatever it is. I'm not saying Purdue's unathletic, but Purdue does not have a guy who stands out as like, I think back to last year, Cam Heide was that way. Miles Colvin was that way. There were guys that were like, well, when all's equal, those guys have the athleticism that, you might see something spectacular. And I don't think Purdue has a guy that's capable of doing that, on par with some of the elite athletes we're going to see. The true test will probably be next week when Purdue goes to Alabama. We'll see how it matches up against a team that has some players like that. But those guys can be difference makers sometimes. And one of the comments Matt Painter said after the Evansville game was, some guys aren't – he was talking about Fletcher Lawyer, and he said he understands why we're doing what we're doing. And he said other guys aren't doing that. They're just hooping. And sometimes that is, the best strategy is just go out there and just play ball and see if you're better than the other guys. And some of those guys at times have been reasons why Purdue has struggled.
No, I think that's a good one. I mean, listen, you don't start every night with the baseline that Zach Edey gives you. Like that was what that team had 2 years ago, that you're already starting off with a pretty good head start. Didn't make them, invincible by any means, but a lot of nights, what chance did a lot of those teams have? Even sometimes good teams, like you're starting out so far in the hole, you have to change the way you play, a lot of things like that. So do they have that guy like Braden Smith, as talented as he is? Does he have that sort of gravity? Trey Coffin-Wren, does he have that sort of gravity? Really, nobody does. It's not a knock against them. Zach Edey is a singular player in the history of college basketball. And I don't know if they have one of those singular players. These guys would probably have to play at something beyond their already exceptional level to qualify as that. But it's going to have to be more of a conventional route to a national championship. You don't have the cheat code, as I referred to him before.
Yeah. I also I'm going to go over this just because it kind of plays into what we're kind of discussing. I put one of the biggest threats was just the tournament format. It's a one and done tournament. If you have one bad game, as we saw against Fairleigh Dickinson, that's it. And, it's both the best and worst way to determine a national champion, because teams get beat that, lose to inferior competition. But when you only have to be better for 40 minutes, or not even better, when you only have to outscore a team for 40 minutes to end its season, that's a massive, variable that you can't equate for, because sometimes the way these games play out, and once you get past that first round, you're preparing for an opponent in basically one day that you didn't know you were playing until that day before.
Yeah, the volatility of the NCAA tournament, the unpredictability of the NCAA tournament is, maybe it's not the best way to crown a true champion, I suppose. I think that does let a team, it's a factor in any given year. I don't think it lets a program off the hook for, let's say, going on 2 generations. I think at some point, if you want to say you're at a certain level, you have to be one of the teams that breaks through that variance and can weather that storm and get there. And now Purdue has. So Purdue has joined that club. But you're right. Like, one of the things I put on my list, it was kind of like an honorable mention sort of answer, but it was just sort of the out of nowhere team, or the way that like the portal kind of equalizes things now. Like, what's the team that nobody's talking about right now that just gets on a run at the right time? And Purdue has definitely run into that on a given night. And at some point, I did a piece in the preseason too about like how often the preseason number 1 actually then goes on and wins a national championship, and sort of the hallmarks of that, and which teams were able to do it, which ones weren't. And Purdue has some of those hallmarks in its favor, but it's also, again, just a completely unpredictable thing. Like, Purdue's a better basketball team than St. Peter's, obviously, right? Like, but then why didn't it win that game? Because it's just the wrong confluence of events on the wrong night. Like, and we've seen that. I don't believe this team is not vulnerable to that. I don't know that any team this year is. It could probably happen to anybody. I do think that team 2 years ago might have gotten to a point where it almost felt maybe invincible to that specific thing, right? Like, they had taken things up a level from even as how good they were the year before. But again, without the Edey thing in the middle, or a player of his caliber somewhere that just changes the game so much, any team is vulnerable to that to some extent. My other one was that Houston is just sort of team of destiny. It's a little bit like what happened with UConn a couple of years ago, where UConn was coming off of a national championship, and Houston is now didn't win the national championship, but was right there. I mean, the runner-up, and Florida had to do some things really right in that game to come out with the national championship. It certainly was national championship caliber by any estimation, and bringing all that back, the Kelvin Sampson-ness of it, all those things in Houston's back pocket. Like, do they? We tend to look at Purdue through a very Purdue lens, and what does Purdue or what doesn't Purdue do? Sometimes it's just that there's another one of those teams out there that the exact same conversations are happening about. When those 2 teams meet, the other one wins. So that's kind of on my radar too, is that Purdue could do everything it needs to do and improve in all the ways it needs to improve, and then it gets on a neutral floor, Indianapolis, which is where they played Houston last year, by the way, and it goes in favor of the Cougars. And it won't be like shame, because that's a really great team. They're going to have to beat one of the other great teams, or multiple of the other great teams, in March, probably in early April, to win a national championship. And maybe this is just Houston's year. We don't know yet. A long way to get between now and then, but that's just kind of out there as a threat. And you could probably sub another name in for Houston if you wanted to.
Yeah, very much so. Last year when the tournament came out, people were looking at the brackets and saying, oh, Purdue and Clemson in the second round. That's a pretty good 4-5 matchup. And we never got that. And so then Purdue gets in a situation where it's in the Sweet 16. And it was uncharacteristically for the years prior, was the underdog. It's like, hey, now you're playing the number 1 seed. No one's giving you a chance. And Purdue almost pulled it off. If they do clash again, it's not going to be that. It's going to be, these are the 2 best teams likely in college basketball this season. What a great NCAA tournament Final Four matchup or national championship matchup if things go as they're supposed to. So there will be no like catching anybody by surprise, especially since they played each other. Kelvin Sampson and Matt Painter know each other pretty well from, past experiences. So, if those 2 teams play in the NCAA tournament, I think college basketball wins, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah. The only thing we know for sure is that no matter what region Purdue is in, if they're the 1, Tennessee will be the 2 or the 3, and they will be on trajectory to meet for a trip to the Final Four, because that's just how it happens every year now. And for people who didn't see, they're now going to play in the regular season each of the next 2 years. So Tennessee coming to Mackey in 2026, Purdue going to Knoxville in 2027. I think that's a great non-conference series. I'm glad they were able to put that together. Let's go rapid fire a little bit through some of these other questions I gave you. The most essential player to the championship chances outside of the big three. So outside of Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trakoff, and Wren, who's the most who are we going to look back in April and say that was the guy who without him this couldn't have happened?
So what I wrote down and what I was researching, I'm changing my answer from that. So this is going with no research, but you got me thinking when you said how instrumental defense is. And I look at what Jakari Harris and CJ Cox, I kind of count them as one player because they're somewhat interchangeable, give you from being able to jam and being able to press and being able to on-ball defend ball handlers and frustrate them. That is vital to produce slowing down other teams' offenses. CJ Cox is excellent at making a team take 8 seconds to get across the midcourt stripe, and then you're running an offense basically against an NBA-style shot clock at that point. So I think that is a valuable piece that maybe people don't recognize because when you look at a box score, you're looking at points, you're looking at shot making, what was your shooting percentage, things like that. Nobody looks at how well did you defend that didn't lead to anything, maybe didn't even lead to turnovers, but it just slowed the other team down a little bit. And I think those two can be a big piece in that regard.
I think that's a fantastic answer. It wasn't the one that I put down. Mine is defense related too. That's why I kind of started to smile because I thought we were going to say the same thing. But it's both what that does to another team and what that takes off of Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer to some extent. But like there's a lot of teams where your point guard would then have to be the one that goes out and jams the other point guard, right? Or has to expend a lot of energy on defense. And Purdue has a structure where they don't have to do that. They can let these other two guys combine for 37 to 40 minutes a night and be the ones who are going out there and doing that really difficult job. I think that is a really good and listen, containing dribble penetration, to go back to that thing that I said earlier about if the defense just doesn't get there, like that's sort of the whole thing almost right now. It's like containing dribble penetration and rebounding. Can you get to a place where even if you're not the best team in the country, you're a lot better than you were last year? Maybe that's the thing that closes the gap. The guy I picked in a similar vein is Daniel Jacobson, who is, I think you're still seeing like he's hit a couple threes early on, and you're seeing some of that smoothness that he has on offense. You're also seeing times where, moving with the ball is not there completely for him yet, and what his usage is offensively. But the defensive utility and value is so obvious. And that was the other number that I was kind of teasing to before. I looked at block percentage and where teams rank there. And it's rare that a team that wins a national championship is like an elite shot blocking team. In the last 15 champions, only one team, and it was the Anthony Davis 2012 Kentucky team, I think, that was number one in the country in block percentage. Everybody else, I mean, you've had a couple top 20s, some teams as low as like barely be in the top 200. But what none of those teams had was a absence of rim protection. They all were blocking. They had a block percentage of at least 9% or higher. Last year, Purdue was 5.1. That was 358th in the country. They basically had no rim protection. And Jacobson, number one, is providing that. Oscar Clough also obviously has a couple blocks. He had one last night. I think he had at least one or two during the exhibition games. He can provide some of that as well. And just putting that anchor at the back and the confidence that I think that the rest of Purdue's defense can play with, they can take a few more chances and know that there's somebody behind them who is going to have their back, literally. So he's somebody that I think just from a defensive standpoint, no matter what his production numbers are, having that presence back there and making teams have to factor that into how they attack Purdue, having teams, individual players having to make decisions in the moment based on this guy being there, that tree in the lane. I think that is potentially the thing that is transformative for the defense, because they had it last year. They saw what it was going to be. It was taken away from them. You saw what the end result was defensively. Now you're adding that back into the mix. It just feels like it could be the thing that is what pushes the defense where it has to go.
Yeah, and that was my original answer. So I'm glad I changed it. So we get some more perspective on that. There are two guys that I saw extensively who were just, their presence put fear into other teams where they almost felt like they couldn't go to the rim and shoot because they were going to get blocked. One was Zach Edey, obviously, just being the 7'4" Sequoia that was there, that people would literally drive to the basket, see him standing there, and just dribble the ball back up to the perimeter and reset the offense. The other was at a different level. It was at high school. It was Flory Badunga when he was at Kokomo High School. He's now a sophomore at Kansas. And he was just a guy that was like an athletic freak. And you would see these kids drive to the basket, and it's like, okay, I've not seen a 6'10" guy that can touch the top of the backboard before. I better go back out here and let's try to reset the offense and find something else. So I don't know that Daniel Jacobson puts that much fear into people, but he is going to, as the season goes on, the more and more block shots he gets, and the more he can understand how to play that role without getting in foul trouble. He has the luxury of, if he does get in foul trouble, they have options at center with Clough, and with Trey Coppin-Wren, I think will play some of that role too, especially when you saw kind of the continuity not being there with the pick and roll with Braden Smith and Daniel Jacobson against Evansville, the way that it obviously is with a guy like Trey Coppin-Wren. You just have to take advantage of that natural chemistry that those two have. But he is a guy that I think will force some teams to say, like, you know what, we're going to think twice about trying to get in the lane and score, because it's likely going to get blocked and turn into a transition offense for Purdue.
Yeah, again, I don't even know if it's so much an intimidation factor. I think it is just sort of the presence. And like I said, having rim protection doesn't guarantee anything. None of these factors guarantees Purdue anything. But not having rim protection, based on those results, based on those numbers of what championship teams look like, would tell me that it does eliminate you if you aren't providing a certain level of rim protection. And I think Jacobson does that almost by default. I said rapid fire, and then we took a long time to answer that question. Will Braden Smith get the assist record? He had 11 on opening night. That leaves him 308 away from potentially passing Hurley. And that means if Purdue were to only play the regular season, one Big Ten tournament game and one NCAA tournament game, which I don't think anybody's expecting that, it means he'd have to average 9.6 assists per game. If Purdue were to play 40 games, which is the whole regular season, plus 3 Big Ten tournament games, plus 6 NCAA tournament games, he'd only have to average 7.89 per game.
Yeah.
So do you think Braden Smith breaks the all-time NCAA assist record?
No. If we're doing rapid fire. I had it, and we proved last night that my math maybe sometimes isn't that great. But I took the 11 into account that he had last night. Mm-hmm. And then I said, okay, he needs 307 to tie, which technically still would be the record. Right. And I had him at, if Purdue goes to the Sweet 16, loses in the Big Ten tournament in the first round, I think first or second round, whatever it was, I had him at needing to average 8.8 if that was the case. Now, Purdue will probably play more games than that, so that average will go down. But that's still an astronomical number to average. And I almost felt like against Evansville, he was looking to get assists to pad his assist total in a game like that. So maybe, as much as he says he's not looking at that or chasing that record, I think subconsciously you just naturally do, because it's been brought up to his attention numerous times. And these games where you just have such a talent differential, maybe that's a game where you get ahead of the curve there, and you can pick up 10, 12 assists on any given night where you're going to win by 30 points. But going into the season, he needed 318 to tie, 319 to break the record. Mm-hmm. Last year he had 313, and I thought that was incredible. And that was in 36 games. The year before he had 292, which at the time was the Purdue single season record, and obviously was broken last year. And I felt like he was assisting almost every time Zach Edey scored that season. So you would have to do something even more next level this year to get there. And he's going to be very high on the all-time list. There's a reason that record has stood for as long as it has. Bobby Hurley played in numerous Final Fours, which also helped. But they didn't play as many regular season games back then, I don't think, also. So I would be more interested when all is said and done, if you compared those two and how many assists per game they had, because both of them had the luxury, as anybody who's probably anywhere near the top of this list, of playing with some of the best players in the history of college basketball.
I think those are all strong arguments. I think I would still vote yes. I think they are probably going to play enough games that the average he'll need per game it'll be attainable. It'll be in line with what he did last year. I don't think he'll necessarily have to be, I don't think he's going to have to average more than he did last year to break this record. Now, I also think that it helps him to kind of, to your point, he has 11 against Evansville. Was he out there kind of hunting them in garbage time? Maybe, I suppose. Now he turned the ball over like 13 seconds in the game, did not have any more turnovers the rest of the game. So if you're going to have an 11-1 turnover ratio or assist to turnover ratio, I don't know that it matters if you're out there hunting for assists.
That turnover too was not totally on him.
Right.
It was
right.
on him, and it was the guy that wasn't where he thought he was going to be.
Exactly. And I thought it was very obvious early on in that game that they were missing. They had just found out that morning that they were going to miss somebody who played 110 straight games, right? Like you could tell there was an absence of Trakoff and Wren out there, and in the way that just some things went together. But I mean, if they were to play all 40 games and starting from today, after he has those 11, he doesn't have to average 8 per game. That seems very attainable to me. That means full health. That means winning every game you can along the way. I think, I guess his chances would actually go up in some ways if they weren't a top 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament and had to play one more game, but whatever. That's obviously not the focus. And I'm just trying to think of how many times, like I think of him as a guy, when he gets 8, 9, 10 assists on a night, it's almost not a story anymore, right? Like that's just kind of what Braden Smith is. So how many times will he only get like 3 or 4 assists in a game that would really pull that average down? I don't know how often that's going to happen. I think it's the schedule, the non-conference schedule that they play helps him, because I don't think that he's going to play as much garbage time as somebody else might. Like you're going to have, you got Alabama, you got Iowa State, you got Auburn. Who am I forgetting? The games in the Bahamas. Like you play so many good non-conference games that he's going to be in those games for 38 minutes, right? So that I think helps, because it's just an accumulation issue at that point. So I'm optimistic. I'm usually the one who's like, oh, he's not going to do that. Like, come on, look at the math. But I think the math actually sort of lines up in his favor, and we'll see how it goes. I think we're going to cut it there. We've been going for 50 minutes. We had a couple other topics. Maybe it's something we can bring up on a future episode. But for now, I think we've given you a good primer of what we think is in Purdue's way this season and the ways that we think Purdue already is a national championship caliber team. It kind of, to wrap it up, to go back to the thing we started talking about at the beginning, like this is still the storyline in just a different form that there was 2 years ago. You still had Zach Edey coming back from a team that was number 1 NCAA tournament seed, and yet it had to evolve. Like Braden Smith had to get better. Fletcher Loyer had to get better. They were only freshmen that first year. I'm telling people like things they already know. They had to go to the portal to get a piece that like brought all of that together in Lance Jones. And I'm seeing some parallels here. Like they already have the baseline in a lot of metrics that they would need. And at the same time, they need to evolve defensively. Matt Painter, when I was talking to him a couple weeks ago, made, I thought, a really good point. Was like, we can talk about Jakari Harris and CJ Cox and Daniel Jacobson, but who are the guys who are going to be on the court the most? Braden Smith, Trakoff and Wren, Fletcher Loyer. They have to have the best defensive seasons of their career. They have to be better defensively than they've been before, because they're out there the most. And you can't be a great defensive team if the players who play the most aren't great defensive players. That was his quote, not mine. So that evolution still has to happen. But they showed 2 years ago that that's the path to take. Have the foundation, and then make the revisions and the enhancements that you need to make. And this is where it can take you.
Yeah, and real quickly here, the one thing that struck me that season on multiple occasions, one being when Purdue lost to Wisconsin in the Big Ten tournament, I think it was a semifinal, and then when Purdue lost at Northwestern that year, they kind of like brushed it off like, oh, okay, that happens, and on to the next. And I thought in that moment at Northwestern, that was the calmest I'd ever seen a team that had such high expectations that just lost a game that most people thought it had no business losing. And they were like, this is the Big Ten. This happens. Our goal is not to win at Northwestern in January. The goal was to win a national championship. And along the way, you have to have those setbacks to get there.
Yeah. And we'll see. Like, they've already had a little dose of adversity, having to play a game without Trakoff and Ben. Yes, it was a game that they were heavily favored in and that they won easily, but it's still like just those little like adjustments that you go through over the course of a year. What did they gain from this? What did maybe Jack Benter gain from that experience? Even though he might only have to play 8 minutes a night the rest of the season, but the next time you need him to play 15 or 20, does this Tuesday night help him when that comes? Maybe it's 2 months from now. You don't know. A long way to go. I think it's going to be interesting to watch this change and adapt and turn into whatever it is destined to be. over the next several months. That's Sam King. I'm Nathan Baird. We will both be at Mackey Arena Friday night. We'll be in Ross-Ade Stadium on Saturday. A lot of Purdue action this weekend. Come join us for those conversations after those games. Take care.